I call the honourable member Craig Foss.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I find myself in a very awkward position of actually agreeing with members on the other side on something. Before the dinner break, Mr Cunliffe and I think one of his colleagues earlier spoke and said that Dr Cullen would have never delivered a budget like this. So true. So true. Because let's have a look at some of the differences. This is transparent. This has a path to lower debt, to a surplus. This has open transparency and integrity of numbers, and wherever possible things have been front-loaded, such as putting in this year the full commitment of this government to reconstruction of Canterbury, all up about $8.8 billion going into the accounts, the fiscals this year. The previous member started worrying about why are we doing this bill tonight, it doesn't come into some of the changes next year. Actually, there's this little thing, why is it counted, I think he was saying? Well, there's a thing called the forecast period. I think in the Public Finance Act you will find that actually 3 or 4 years you have to forecast any and everything, excuse me, Mr Speaker, the Minister of Finance must forecast any and everything that they know that will affect the accounts of this country. So anything that a Minister of Finance knows is going to happen, has happened, probably will happen, is actually in this budget. And if there's something a bit further that I'm unsure of, well, it's in the various contingencies down the back, Mr Speaker. So it provides certainty in very uncertain times, Mr Speaker. And we do note that how the opposition leader thought after he's got over what did he do? Sign the free trade agreement with China all on his own or something like that, he said earlier. But after he did that, he also told us that the global financial crisis ended sometime in 2009. And as our Prime Minister invited him to go around the pigs around the country, the Portugals, the islands, Greece and Spain, and suggest to them that it's over and see what they say. Mr Speaker, this budget, this bill will keep interest rates lower for longer. It is that simple. Mortgage interest rates, working capital interest rates will stay lower for longer. They have been at record lows under this government. They will continue to stay low under this government. Why might that be? A couple of reasons, Mr Speaker. One, because this government is getting its books and its house in order after inheriting ongoing spending increases from the previous government, which had no corresponding revenue increases attached to it. Also, Mr Speaker, under this government, real inflation is going at around 2.5%. Everyone's been compensated for the GST increase, unlike the previous administration. Under the previous administration, inflation was running at 5% plus, in spite of the Reserve Bank Act, which they seem now so keen to want to change. Yet for at least 3 or 4 years of their last period, inflation well exceeded the 3% target, the 3% cap actually, as defined in the Reserve Bank Act. Mr Speaker, this bill actually passes 4 solid good tests. Yes, it puts New Zealand in a better frame and New Zealand enterprises in a better frame to grow their exports, because this has to be an export-led recovery, Mr Speaker. There is only upside actually over the last 4 or 5 years prior to this administration coming through, because there was no real growth. In fact, export, the real tradable sector, went backwards since 2004. So it passes the test of an export growth budget economy, Mr Speaker. It grows savings, Mr Speaker. KiwiSaver contributions are going up, Mr Speaker. It references household savings rates are on the increase, Mr Speaker. The Dr Bollard from the Reserve Bank noted the other day, for the first time in living memory, actually bank deposits are growing. New Zealanders are saving more, borrowing less, moving from the debt-laden property boom that we had in the previous administration. Mr Speaker, it passes the test of reducing a deficit, of showing a lower debt track. We are going to surplus sooner than predicted, even in last year's budget, and much, much, much sooner than was in the papers to the incoming administration post-election of this national government, when the decade of deficits was forecast and when the real numbers started to hit home. Members may recall a minor problem with the budget in 2008 actually didn't include all those things around Kiwi Rail, and it didn't include all the issues around ACC. But that's for another story, another day, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this budget also passes the test of higher real after-tax incomes for New Zealanders, for New Zealand families, for New Zealand households. This particular bill, part one of this particular bill, actually sets the annual rates of income tax, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, that defines the after-tax incomes of New Zealanders, which have grown at 6% after only 2.5 years of this national government. Real incomes after 9 years of the previous administration and the best economic times possible only grew 3% after 9 years, Mr. Speaker. There's a bit of a problem there. Finally, Mr. Speaker, just one point. Members opposite are starting to point to page 81 of the budget, and they're talking about some conspiracy theory or something. Well, as they are reading half the page, if you want. They talk about a discrepancy between IRD forecasts and Treasury forecasts on tax take. Actually, if you read the page, excuse me, Mr. Speaker, again, if members read the page, it's actually all about corporate tax. And just let me read the first couple of sentences of paragraph 2, which they keep seeming to forget, because it does say, as they pointed out, the lower forecasts of tax revenue from inland revenue indicate that there may be some downside risk to our tax forecast. Fair enough, open, honest. This is the bit the opposition keep forgetting to mention the second sentence. At the same time, there are also upside risks, Mr. Speaker. Basically, that says the tax forecast from IRD possibly could be wrong on the downside, possibly could be right on the upside, but actually if Treasury are at one level, IRD are at another level, they'll tend to merge along the way. And in fact, I recall Dr. Cullen having ongoing issues, and in fact it started an inquiry from memory as to why his various forecasts were so discrepant from those of IRD in many of his budgets. So, Mr. Speaker, as we move through talking about this budget, talking about the taxation bill in front of us, I do agree with members who, interestingly, are starting to justify previous budgets, at least over 2 years, maybe even 11 years old, from Dr. Cullen to somehow justify what they're saying today, totally forgetting to offer their own alternative plan for this budget, and they'll be doing going into election. They're still stuck in the past talking about Dr. Cullen, and I do agree, though, interestingly, finding myself agreeing with members on the other side, Dr. Cullen would have never delivered a budget like this, because quite simply this budget is still trying to attempt to fix the problems that the previous administration, under the stewardship of Clark and Cullen, actually put upon this country. Quite devastating problems, Mr. Speaker, but this is the administration, this is the Minister of Finance, and this is the budget to arrest and fix those problems and put New Zealand on a solid and good path for growth and prosperity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I call the Honourable